The Miller family vanished from their locked suburban home on a Tuesday in November, leaving behind absolutely no signs of a struggle. The front door was deadbolted from the inside, the windows were sealed shut, and a hot breakfast was still sitting untouched on the dining room table. Local law enforcement spent 48 hours scouring the property, initially categorizing it as a voluntary disappearance due to mounting financial stress. It wasn't until a forensic photographer began processing the mundane details of the living room that the true nature of the scene began to reveal itself. The anomaly was quiet, slow, and completely impossible.
The only piece of evidence that warranted further scrutiny was a framed family portrait resting on the heavy stone mantelpiece above the fireplace. The 8x10 color photograph, dated 1974, depicted the family of four posing rigidly for a professional studio portrait. The mother, two children, and the father all wore matching beige knit sweaters and forced, uncomfortable smiles. The forensic photographer noted in his initial report that the image felt unnaturally cold, though he attributed it to the poor lighting of the era. However, upon reviewing his contact sheets the following morning, he realized his assumption was fundamentally flawed.
The discrepancy was subtle at first, the kind of detail the human brain automatically attempts to rationalize as a trick of the light or a printing error. In the original negative developed by the photographer, the father in the portrait stood directly behind his wife, his large hands resting firmly on her shoulders. But when the photographer returned to the physical house to retrieve the frame as evidence, the visual composition had shifted. The father's hands were no longer touching the woman. He was now standing approximately 3 inches to her left, staring directly into the camera lens with a rigid, expressionless gaze.
The lead investigator immediately assumed the photograph was a novelty item, perhaps a lenticular print designed to change images depending on the viewing angle. He ordered the frame to be dismantled and the paper itself subjected to chemical analysis. The lab results were entirely mundane, confirming the material was standard, mass-produced Kodak photographic paper from the mid-70s. There were no hidden layers, no digital screens, and no tampering of any kind. It was simply dried chemical emulsion on paper. And yet, when the technician placed the print down on the stainless steel examination table, the figure had moved once again.
By the evening of the third day, the father in the image was positioned at the far left edge of the studio backdrop. His body language had changed dramatically, shifting from a relaxed family pose to a tense, unnatural posture, as if he were bracing himself to forcefully walk through an invisible barrier. The other 3 family members depicted in the photograph remained perfectly frozen in time, their painted smiles completely unchanged and totally oblivious to the spatial impossibility occurring inches away from them. The investigation team began to document the photograph hourly, realizing that whatever process was happening, it was accelerating.
The local precinct attempted to contact the original studio that took the portrait, hoping to find alternative negatives or outtakes that might explain the shifting geometry. The studio had burned down in an unexplained electrical fire over a decade ago, leaving no records. Desperate for a logical framework, the chief detective theorized that humidity or a slow chemical degradation was somehow warping the emulsion, causing the dark pigments to drift across the surface of the paper. This theory was completely abandoned when the precinct set up a time-lapse camera, and the movement became undeniable.
Over the next 48 hours, the time-lapse footage revealed that the figure wasn't just sliding across the chemical surface. His limbs were actually articulating. He was walking. The movement was painfully slow, akin to watching the hour hand on a clock, but it was deliberate and entirely physical. The father's heavy boots could be seen lifting and planting themselves on the fake grass of the studio backdrop. The fabric of his beige knit sweater folded and creased with every microscopic shift in his posture. He was navigating a two-dimensional space as if it possessed real volume.
By hour 60, the situation escalated beyond any recognized physical law. The father's right arm and shoulder had completely crossed the white physical border of the photographic paper. The pixels, the film grain, and the chemical emulsion simply ceased to exist past that geometric line. Yet his body continued to move forward into the negative space. He wasn't falling off the paper. He was stepping outside of its dimensional constraints. The researchers watched in absolute silence as half of his torso vanished into the empty air surrounding the corkboard.
The lead investigator ordered the room sealed and the time-lapse camera connected to an external monitor in the hallway. No personnel were allowed to enter the evidence room, out of a sudden, irrational fear of what might happen if the figure fully exited the frame. The atmosphere in the precinct grew incredibly tense, characterized by long stretches of heavy silence, punctuated only by the mechanical clicking of the time-lapse shutter. They were no longer investigating a disappearance. They were documenting a spatial rupture.
On the morning of the fourth day, at precisely 6:14 a.m., the time-lapse camera recorded the final movement. The father took one last, agonizingly slow step, and his left heel vanished completely past the edge of the photograph. The space where he originally stood for the portrait was now just empty 1970s studio backdrop. The photograph was now simply a picture of a mother and two children, smiling happily into the lens. The father was completely gone.
The image was perfectly seamless, completely devoid of any visual artifacting, chemical smudging, or evidence that the fourth figure had ever existed within its borders. The precinct immediately dispatched a tactical team back to the Miller residence, operating under a protocol that didn't technically exist. They were operating on pure instinct, driven by the impossible logic that if the man had stepped out of the photograph, he must have stepped into somewhere else.
A rookie officer stationed outside for perimeter security reported a severe disturbance before the tactical team even arrived. He keyed his radio, his voice trembling, claiming he heard heavy, methodical movement inside the sealed, empty house. The front door remained deadbolted, the windows were still locked from the inside, and the alarm system showed no breaches. But the sounds coming from the second floor were impossible to ignore. The officer's body cam footage, later recovered and heavily redacted, shows him kicking in the front door and entering the dark living room. His flashlight beam swept frantically across the thick brown shag carpet and the untouched dining table. The house was exactly as it had been left 4 days prior, but the heavy silence of the empty rooms was abruptly shattered by the distinct, wet sound of a heavy boot stepping onto the hardwood floor in the hallway above.
The tactical team breached the house less than 3 minutes later, flooding the first floor with light. The family was never found, but the forensic team made a chilling discovery. A trail of wet, heavy boot prints originated directly on top of the stone mantelpiece, stepped down onto the shag carpet, and led straight down the hallway. The prints stopped abruptly in front of the closed white wooden door of the coat closet. I'm leaving this audio diary running because the police refused to come back to the house. They told me it was just a sophisticated prank call, probably some local kids messing with the phone lines to scare me. But you can't fake the biometric cadence of a voice. The voice leaving the frantic messages on my answering machine is unequivocally mine. I know my own voice, and whoever is speaking on that tape is absolutely terrified.
It all started yesterday evening. I got home from my shift at the plant, unlocked the front door, and immediately noticed the blinking red light on the Somnovision dual cassette answering machine in the hallway. 3 new messages. I hit play, expecting it to be a telemarketer or my mother. Instead, the tape hissed, and I heard myself breathing heavily. Then, my own voice whispered, "The door won't open. Please, I'm in the hallway closet. It won't open."
I didn't even hesitate. I dropped my keys and immediately yanked open the white wooden door to the hallway closet, expecting to find an intruder playing a sick joke. It was completely empty. It was just a normal closet, filled with dusty winter coats, an old vacuum cleaner, and a cardboard box of Christmas ornaments. I stood there, staring at the coats, trying to convince myself that someone with expensive audio equipment had somehow spliced together old recordings of my voice to create the message. I closed the door and returned to the machine, my hands shaking as I pressed the button for the second message. The tape whirred and clicked. It was me again, but this time my voice was raw and hoarse, sounding like I had been screaming for hours in the dark. The voice on the tape sobbed. "It's pitch black in here. The walls are soft. They feel like flesh. Why won't you just open the door?"
That's when I looked back at the closet and noticed the hardware. A heavy, solid brass deadbolt was installed on the outside of the white wooden door. I have lived in this house for 6 years, and I have never installed a deadbolt on a coat closet. It serves absolutely no logical purpose. And more importantly, I am absolutely certain it wasn't there when I left for work this morning.
I called the police immediately. 2 patrol officers arrived, inspected the heavy brass deadbolt, and listened to the tape. They exchanged a tired look, told me I likely had a stalker, and advised me to change the locks. They refused to break open the closet door due to property damage protocols. As they walked out the front door, leaving me completely alone, I noticed a yellow floral teacup on the table, vibrating slightly.
Exactly 10 minutes after their cruiser pulled out of my driveway, the Somnovision machine beeped loudly. The live monitoring function clicked on automatically, amplifying the caller's voice directly through the small plastic speaker into the silent hallway. It was the 3rd message, broadcasting in real time. But the voice wasn't just sobbing anymore. It was deteriorating into a primal, animalistic panic.
My own voice echoed through the hallway, vibrating with a terror I didn't know I was capable of expressing.
"I can hear you out there,"
the voice rasped through the static.
"I can hear your breathing on the other side of the wood. Please, please just turn the lock. The walls are soft in here. They feel like warm flesh. It's getting so tight." I didn't have a key for the impossible brass deadbolt, and the police had abandoned me. I ran to the garage, frantic, and grabbed a heavy steel crowbar from my workbench. I sprinted back into the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wedged the curved end of the crowbar into the gap between the white wooden door and the door frame, right above the deadbolt. I threw my entire body weight against the steel bar, trying to pry the lock open. The wood groaned and began to splinter loudly. I struck the door frame again, harder this time. As the metal hit the wood, the answering machine speaker crackled back to life.
my voice came through, completely clear, devoid of the previous static.
The voice on the machine spoke directly to me, reacting to my physical actions in real time. "You're hitting it too high," my own voice instructed calmly from the speaker. "The deadbolt is reinforced. You need to pry near the bottom hinges to compromise the structural integrity." I froze, dropping the crowbar onto the shag carpet. The voice wasn't a recording. It was observing me.
The silence in the hallway was absolute. Then, a massive, deafening impact shook the floorboards. From inside the locked coat closet, something struck the interior of the white wooden door. It was the unmistakable sound of heavy steel hitting wood. Thwack! The impact occurred in the exact same spot where I had just been prying with my crowbar.
Thwack! Another impact from inside the closet, splintering the door panel outward towards me. Whatever was inside had a crowbar too, and it was trying to break out. The answering machine speaker erupted into a cacophony of panicked, high-pitched screaming. It was my voice, shrieking, "Let me out! I'm sorry, just let me out!" as the steel repeatedly smashed against the interior wood.
I don't know what will happen if the wood finally gives way and the door opens. I don't know what is waiting on the other side of that deadbolt, wearing my voice. I'm dropping the recorder now. The hinges are starting to buckle under the assault from the inside, and I have to use both hands to hold the door shut. May God help me.
Following the sudden disappearance of the civilian homeowner, the entire suburban property was immediately seized under Protocol 7. The structural anomaly was immediately apparent. Preliminary architectural scans of the ground floor revealed a catastrophic geometric failure centered on the main hallway.
The exterior footprint of the house measured precisely 32 feet in depth. However, internal laser telemetry of the hallway coat closet recorded a depth of 41 feet. The interior of the structure was physically overlapping with empty space outside the house, violating basic Euclidean geometry. The topology division immediately established a secure perimeter. The white wooden closet door, heavily splintered from the inside by the previous occupant, was entirely removed from its hinges. The resulting aperture revealed a dark, unfinished tunnel stretching perfectly horizontally into the pitch black. The closet simply did not end. Automated aerial drones were deployed to map the impossible extension. Initial drone telemetry confirmed the walls of the impossibly deep tunnel were composed of the exact same mundane drywall and peeling floral wallpaper as the hallway, repeating in an endless, seamless pattern. The architectural elements were merely copied and pasted into the void, a digital glitch manifesting in physical reality. As the drone descended deep into the dark, it suddenly lost all radio contact. The final corrupted image transmitted back to the command console was heavily distorted, but it clearly showed the floral wallpaper terminating abruptly. It was replaced by a wet, textured surface that visual analysis algorithms flagged with high probability as damp, breathing flesh. Deeming automated aerial exploration unviable due to the rapid signal degradation and spatial distortion, the engineering team opted for a purely mechanical approach. A heavy-duty industrial winch, painted high-visibility yellow, was brought into the living room and bolted directly into the structural hardwood floor beams facing the closet aperture. A braided titanium-reinforced cable, rated for over 3 tons of tension, was attached to a specialized unpowered sensory package.
The package was then slowly lowered horizontally into the darkness of the closet tunnel. The operation was conducted in complete silence, monitored by a single technician at the command console. For hours, the motorized winch unspooled smoothly, the gears clicking in a rhythmic, monotonous cadence. The thick cable descended endlessly into the impossible space. Far beyond the physical boundaries of the house, the analog sensory package recorded a sudden, massive drop in ambient temperature, dropping below freezing in a matter of seconds. The cable continued to feed into a suburban coat closet that, geometrically speaking, should have ended after a mere 36 inches. The tension meter on the winch console remained stable and low, indicating the sensory package was simply resting motionless on an unseen surface, deep in the dark. The operational log remained uneventful until hour 5. Without any prior seismic warning, the digital tension meter on the winch console suddenly spiked violently into the red. The titanium cable lying across the hallway carpet went entirely taut, snapping straight and vibrating with immense, sudden kinetic energy.
The heavy steel winch groaned loudly under the catastrophic strain, the massive bolts visibly shifting and tearing at the hardwood floorboards. The motor whined in distress. Something deep within the dark, impossible geometry of the closet, over 100 meters away, had taken hold of the sensory package with absolute, unyielding strength. And then it began to pull back. The motorized winch, despite its massive industrial torque, was suddenly forced into reverse. The gears screamed in protest as the cable was violently dragged further into the darkness by a physical force that defied all localized physical laws. The recorded tension exceeded the 3-ton safety rating in less than 10 seconds. The structural beams of the living room began to splinter and crack audibly as the 1,000-pound winch was literally dragged across the floor toward the open closet, ripping through the floorboards.
The final entry in the automated incident log simply states that the titanium cable snapped at maximum tension. The sensory package and whatever held it was lost. The house was immediately evacuated, and the closet aperture was sealed with 4 feet of reinforced concrete. The property remains under constant surveillance. Containment status: unstable.